I think it's an important opportunity to review Ireland's response to the refugee crisis, both at a national as well as EU level. And I want to focus my remarks today about the plight and the circumstances of women and children refugees. Other deputies have referred to them in their contributions, but I want to really zero in on them. I think, you know, as the Minister knows, and again, as all of us in the Chamber are aware, women and children are at a particular risk in Europe at present. And I also just want to acknowledge and say that it's heartening to have to see several of the frontline organizations like Immigrant Council of Ireland, are also supported by, and again other deputies have referred to, Amnesty International and others, provide us with information and analysis as lawmakers for our consideration and our discernment on the wide variety of issues with respect to refugees, but in particular women and children. Figures from the UNHCR tell us that women and children now make up the majority of those reaching Europe by sea, that 55% of the 180,588 people who have crossed the Mediterranean Sea to Europe so far in 2016 are women and children. And in the refugee camp in Idomeni on the Greek border with the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, there are currently 9,900 people, of which 40% are children and 22% are women. And these women are particularly vulnerable, forced to sleep in crowded conditions or outside, exposing themselves to risk. As a result, many women are sleeping in groups and in shifts as they try to look out for one another. Why is there an increase in women making the journey now? I suppose after 5 years of war, many of these refugees have depleted their life saving and desperation is settling in. Early and forced marriage has increased dramatically due to the conditions of absolute poverty. Adult refugee women are also advertising themselves as brides for sale as another devastating survival mechanism. And in many of the neighboring countries, Syrian refugees can't access, as we know, public services or work. That almost 700,000 Syrian children are not enrolled in any form of education, and that in Jordan alone 115,000 children are not attending school and compelled in many instances to work informally in dangerous conditions, and so that we will see an entire generation of Syrians uneducated. Of course, Syrian women are worried for their families and their futures. At a recent roundtable event in Dublin, organized by the Immigrant Council and also hosted by the European Parliament office in Dublin, a young Syrian woman living in Dublin talked about her fellow countrywomen who have taken the risky decision to seek refuge in Europe. She spoke of how women feared for their lives and hardly slept a wink for the entire journey, and that many women who previously never wore the hijab are now wearing it on the journey, hoping that it will shield them from sexual exploitation and violence. She also spoke of a woman that she met traveling with 9 children. 4 of them were her own, and the other 5 belonged to her sister. Her sister had made it to the EU and had refugee status, but had not managed to get family reunification, so had asked her sister to bring her children on the treacherous journey, having waited 2 years on the official response to her application. So I think that we need to think carefully about why families need to take such risks. These stories surely are catalysts for us to increase the pace of family reunification applications. And I think Deputy Dáil had some very helpful proposals or suggestions in this regard. It's great to hear those constructive suggestions. But you know, even after fleeing the violence of Syria, violence is a common experience for refugees on the move. Unequal gender relations, unequal relations between women and men become magnified at the time of crisis. Robbery, violence, and rape are commonplace. Many women are forced to engage in survival sex with smugglers to get a place on a boat, while others risk being trafficked for exploitation. And yet, there is currently 100% impunity for sexual crimes and other forms of gender-based crimes committed against refugee women. Not one person has been prosecuted for such a crime, whether smuggler, border guard, or any other person. We have to stop this. And furthermore, this is why it is inhuman that we allow the smuggling gangs to flourish, others deputies have referred to them, instead of guaranteeing safe and legal routes to the EU for these women fleeing a ravaging war. So not only do they risk violence en route, but there are also health risks on the precarious journey. The UN estimates that at least 12% of the women making the journey to Europe are pregnant. Yet they don't have any access to basic prenatal or postnatal care or any other reproductive health services along the refugee route. The security and safety of refugee women can only be guaranteed if safer and legal routes to the EU are made available. So we need increased legal pathways, including greater use of resettlement programs, family reunification, humanitarian visas, and study visas for people who are fleeing conflict and persecution. The minister in her speech outlined how Ireland is working with its commitments to take 4,000 refugees under the resettlement program, and that we've also promised to take another 2,600 under the relocation process as part of the burden sharing. In the EU, where it was agreed to relocate 160,000 people, and the minister has referred to the problematic nature of this program, and other deputies have talked about that so far only 10 or 11, I have the figure 10, maybe it's 11 people have arrived under this scheme. There are currently 55,000 people stuck in increasingly difficult and dangerous conditions in Greece, the majority of whom are eligible for relocation. So there is no reason for delay. Some 25,000 Syrians went to Canada recently in a humanitarian transfer program, and it was all processed in 100 days. It is possible to bring women and children to safety, and there is an ethical imperative for us to do everything in our power to discover how to increase the pace of change, to ensure that we don't leave them night after night at risk. And we also need to step up our support to countries of first asylum. Greece and Italy can't cope without collective resources from the EU, and there is a need for burden sharing. And we must also look to improving conditions for refugees in camps in our neighboring countries neighboring Syria, as well as helping the millions displaced within Syria to create safer places for them. And in order to achieve this, I believe that we must, and others have called for increasing funding, but here particularly to the UNHCR. So Europe's credibility, and many deputies have challenged this, and I think for many correct reasons. Our credibility as a promoter and guardian of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law is at risk, is failed if we continue to fail the thousands who are seeking refuge on our shores. Collectively, I think we need to ensure greater protection of women and children through the provision of safe reception centers with separate sleeping facilities and bathroom for women, and proper policing with staff who are trained in gender-based violence. And we need to make sure that the refugees can access reproductive health services along the entire route and access services for victims for women who are victims of violence based on their gender. I want to conclude with the words of the poet Warshon Shire. I think they poignantly reflect the fate and reality of women refugees. I want to go home, but home is the mouth of a shark. Home is the barrel of the gun, and no one would leave home unless home chased you to the shore. You have to understand that no one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land.